The median retirement account for an American between 55 and 64 years old holds about $185,000. Run that through the standard 4% withdrawal rule, and it pays out $616 a month. So after 40 years of working, saving, and doing what you were told, you get $616 a month. What went wrong? Here's the part that doesn't get explained. Compounding isn't one steady climb, and it moves in completely distinct phases, and each phase has different rules. What works in phase 1 will actively hold you back in phase 3. Nobody draws that map for you. This video does exactly that. We're going to walk through all 4 phases of compounding, what each one demands, what each one rewards, and why so many people stall out between them without understanding why. You probably already know the basics. Invest early, be consistent, let time do the work. That logic is solid. The problem isn't that the advice is wrong. The problem is that it's incomplete. My name is Alex, and if you've ever saved consistently for years and still felt like you were barely moving, stay with me, because compounding doesn't work the same way at every stage. And most people are applying the wrong strategy for the phase they're actually in. I'm going to walk you through all 4 phases, show you the math behind each one, and give you a clear action plan for moving from wherever you are right now to the next level. The reason most people never see real results isn't discipline, it's timing. And it starts right at the beginning. Here's something worth sitting with for a second. The people who end up with nothing saved aren't the ones who never tried. They're the ones who tried, didn't see results fast enough, and quietly stopped. Not dramatically, not all at once, just a little less consistent every month until the habit was gone. That's the real failure mode. Not ignorance, timing. People don't fail at building savings because the math is hard. The math is actually straightforward. They fail because they completely misread the timeline. They expect the process to feel like progress, and in the beginning, it doesn't. So they assume something is broken. They adjust, second guess, or walk away entirely, right at the moment when staying put was the only thing that mattered. Think about what that costs. A 32-year-old putting away $300 a month, earning a 7% average annual return, will have roughly $880,000 by 65. Same person, same amount, same return. But they start at 37 instead of 32. That 5-year gap, 5 years of feeling like it wasn't working, drops the final number to around $620,000. The delay cost them $260,000. Not bad decisions. Not a market crash. Just 5 years of waiting for proof that never felt convincing enough. That's what a misread timeline actually looks like in dollar terms. Now here's what makes this harder. The early years of compounding are deliberately quiet. You put money in, the market does its thing, and your balance creeps up by amounts that feel almost insulting relative to the effort. You're doing everything right, and the results look like almost nothing. It genuinely feels broken. And in that silence, doubt fills the gap. This is the phase most people are in when they quit. Not because they're undisciplined, because they don't know what phase they're in. They're treating a long game process like a short-term test. And when it doesn't pass quickly, they move on. The mindset shift that actually changes things isn't motivation. It isn't a better budgeting app. It's understanding that the early phase of compounding is structurally designed to feel unrewarding. The returns are real. They're just small because the base is small. The engine is running. You just can't hear it yet. So what does getting through this phase actually require? 3 things, and none of them are complicated. Consistency over intensity. Showing up with whatever amount you have every single month without skipping. Automation, removing the decision entirely so your savings move before you can talk yourself out of it. And an honest look at your numbers, not to feel good about them, but to understand exactly where you stand right now. That's the work of phase 1. It's not glamorous, but it's the only way to reach what comes next. Because once you get through the grind, something shifts. The acceleration phase kicks in, and for the first time, the money starts doing work you didn't do. There's a moment that happens quietly, and most people almost miss it. You check your account one morning and notice the balance moved. Not because of your deposit, but because of returns on money that was already sitting there. It's not a big number, maybe $40, maybe $80, but it didn't come from your paycheck. It came from the system working on its own. That's the moment phase 2 begins. And if you know what you're looking at, it changes everything. And this is the acceleration phase. And the reason it feels different isn't emotional, it's mathematical. In phase 1, almost every dollar of growth came from you. Your contributions were doing nearly all the lifting. The compounding effect existed, but it was small because the base it was working on was small. Now the base has grown, and that changes the math in a way that's hard to appreciate until you actually see it laid out. Here's a concrete example. When someone starts investing $200 a month at 25 years old, earning a 7% average annual return. By 35, they've put in $24,000 of their own money. Their balance is around $34,000. The compounding contribution is real but modest, roughly $10,000 on top of what they deposited. Fast forward to 45. Same person, same $200 a month, never increased the contribution. They've now put in $48,000 total, but the balance is around $104,000. More than $56,000 of that came from returns on returns. The money they earned started earning money of its own, and that second layer is now bigger than a full year of contributions every single year. By 65, the total contributions are $96,000. The balance is around $528,000, and over $430,000, more than 4 times what they actually put in, came from compounding alone. That's not a trick. That's just what happens when you stay in the game long enough for the base to get large enough to matter. Now, there's an important question worth asking here. What if you increase the contribution over time? Because most people don't stay at $200 a month forever. A 30-year-old earning $70,000 a year who gets a few raises, keeps lifestyle inflation in check, and increases their monthly investment to $600 by their late 30s. That person is on a completely different trajectory. At 7%, they're looking at somewhere north of $1.2 million by 65. The behavior didn't change dramatically. The base just got bigger, faster. This is where the crossover point enters the picture. And this is worth understanding clearly, because it's one of those concepts that sounds abstract until you realize it's describing something very specific and very real. The crossover point is the moment when your investment returns in a given year exceed what you actually earn from working, when the portfolio generates more income than your job does, when work becomes optional in a mathematical sense, not just a feeling, not an aspiration, but a calculable fact you can point to on a spreadsheet. For most people, that number lands somewhere between $800,000 and $1.2 million, depending on their annual expenses. At a 7% return, $1 million generates $70,000 a year. If your lifestyle costs $62,000 a year, you've crossed over. The machine is now running without you feeding it. Getting to that point requires surviving phase 1. But it also requires recognizing phase 2 for what it is. Not the finish line, not the reward, but the inflection point. The moment the curve starts bending upward in a way that, once it starts, doesn't stop. And when the compounding curve bends like that, it doesn't just stay in your portfolio. It starts showing up everywhere else too. Most people think of compounding as a money thing, a portfolio thing, something that happens inside a brokerage account while you go about your life. But here's what starts to become obvious in phase 3. Compounding is a pattern, not a product. And once your financial base is stable enough that you're not making decisions from scarcity, that pattern starts appearing in places that have nothing to do with your account balance. This is the expansion phase, and it's the one that surprises people the most. Think about what actually happened during phases 1 and 2. You didn't just build a portfolio, you built a track record. Years of showing up, following through, staying consistent when it was inconvenient. That track record exists inside your financial accounts, yes, but it also exists in how people perceive you professionally, in the relationships you've maintained, in the reputation you've built without necessarily trying to build it. Reputation compounds the same way money does. Slowly at first, almost invisibly, and then in ways that feel disproportionate to any single action. Here's what that looks like practically. A project manager in his late 30s who has spent a decade delivering on his word, solving problems quietly, and staying calm when things go sideways. That person doesn't just get promotions. He gets calls. He gets recommended for roles that never get posted publicly. He gets brought into conversations early, before decisions are made, because people have learned that his judgment is worth something. None of that came from a single impressive moment. It came from compounding small, consistent behaviors over a long time until the return on his reputation became larger than the return on any individual effort. That's what phase 3 is about. Your skills, your relationships, your professional standing, they all start generating returns that you didn't directly work for in the moment, just like the portfolio. Now, the strategic move in this phase is diversification, not just in the financial sense, though that matters too. The average American household with a net worth above $500,000 holds income from at least three separate sources: a primary salary or business, investment income, and a third stream, rental income, consulting, equity in a side venture, something. That third stream is rarely what makes someone wealthy on its own. What it does is remove the single point of failure. It means a job loss, a market correction, or a bad year in one area doesn't unravel everything else. That kind of structure doesn't happen by accident. It gets built during phase 3, when there's enough stability to take calculated risks without betting the whole foundation. And here's the shift that comes with that stability, one that's hard to fully appreciate until you're inside it. When your income doesn't depend entirely on one source, your decision-making changes. You start saying no to things, not out of arrogance, but out of clarity. A 39-year-old with a healthy portfolio, a solid professional reputation, and a small rental property generating $1,100 a month has options that his peers don't. He can turn down a promotion that would require 60-hour weeks. He can leave a job with a toxic culture without a backup offer already signed. He can take on a project at a lower rate because it's interesting and builds towards something longer term. That freedom, the freedom to say no, is not a luxury that falls out of the sky. It's the direct result of compounding operating across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Most people focus entirely on the financial layer and miss the others. That's the mistake of phase 3. The money matters, but the skills, the reputation, the relationships, the income structure, those are compounding too. And if you're only tending one of them, you're leaving most of the returns on the table. Getting this phase right sets up something much bigger, because once you've built this kind of foundation, the question stops being about what you can accumulate. It shifts to something entirely different. There's a statistic that tends to stop people cold when they first hear it. About 70% of inherited wealth is gone by the second generation. About 90% is gone by the third. Families that spent decades building something substantial watch it dissolve within 30 years of the original builder stepping away. And the reason isn't usually bad luck or a market crash. It's that the money transferred, but the understanding didn't. That's the problem phase 4 is designed to solve. This is the legacy phase. And the shift that defines it isn't a number you hit or an account balance you reach. It's a change in the question you're asking. Up through phases 1, 2, and 3, the central question was some version of, how do I build more? More savings, more income, more security, more options. That's the right question for those phases. But at some point, if the compounding has done its work, that question starts to feel incomplete because you realize that everything you've built has a shelf life, unless you deliberately design it not to. The most durable things people build aren't portfolios. They're systems. Businesses that operate without the founder in the room. Family financial structures with clear principles attached to them. Not just assets. Knowledge that gets passed down in a form that's actually usable. Not just a stack of account numbers in a drawer. Consider what the research actually shows about intergenerational wealth. The families that preserve wealth across multiple generations tend to share a few common characteristics. They talk about money openly and early with their children. Not just the amounts, but the decisions, the trade-offs, the mistakes. They structure inheritance in ways that build capability, rather than just transfer dollars. And they treat financial education as a family project, not a private adult matter. That sounds straightforward, but it runs directly against how most American families handle money, which is quietly, privately, and with a lot of assumptions that the next generation will somehow figure it out. They usually don't, not because they're incapable, but because they were never shown the map. This is where mentorship enters the picture, not as a soft idea, but as a compounding mechanism. A 45-year-old who has navigated phase 1 through 3 has knowledge that took 20 years to acquire. Hard lessons about behavior during market downturns, real experience with what diversification actually feels like when one income stream disappears, an intuitive understanding of when to be patient and when to move. That knowledge has genuine value. Passing it on to a younger colleague, to a child, to someone earlier in the process, multiplies its impact beyond what any single portfolio could produce. That's what significance looks like, as opposed to success. Success is a number. Significance is a number that keeps generating value after you stop actively managing it. Now, none of this requires a dynastic fortune. A person with a paid off home, a $400,000 retirement account, and a small business they've run cleanly for 15 years has plenty to build a legacy from. Yet the asset base matters less than the intentionality. What values are attached to what you're passing on? What financial behaviors are you modeling right now, today, for the people watching you? What would happen to the structures you've built if you stepped away tomorrow? Would they hold or would they quietly collapse? Those are phase 4 questions. And the time to start asking them isn't when you're ready to step back. It's while you still have time to build the systems that make stepping back possible. Because the goal was never just to accumulate. The goal was to build something that compounds long after you've stopped adding to it, which brings everything back to a practical question. Knowing all 4 phases, knowing the rules of each one, how do you actually move through them deliberately, instead of stumbling from one to the next by accident? Here's something that tends to get lost in conversations about long-term investing. The strategies that move you through each phase of compounding aren't complicated. They're just specific. And most people either apply the right strategy at the wrong phase, or they keep doing what worked in phase 1 long after they've outgrown it. So let's be concrete about what actually moves the needle at each level. The first key is starting now with whatever you have. Not when you get the raise, not when the debt is cleared, not when the timing feels right. Now. This isn't motivational language. It's math. Every 12 months, you delay costs you roughly 15% of your eventual outcome, assuming a 7% annual return. A 29-year-old who starts investing $350 a month today will have approximately $1.1 million by 65. And the same person who waits until 34 to start ends up with around $760,000. Same discipline, same amount. $340,000 gone. Not lost in a bad investment, just lost to delay. The starting point is not a minor detail. It's one of the 3 or 4 most consequential financial decisions you will ever make. The second key is building systems instead of relying on willpower. Willpower is a depleting resource. It works fine when life is calm and predictable. It fails reliably when you're stressed, busy, or facing a short-term expense that feels urgent. Automation removes the decision entirely. When your investment contribution moves the day after your paycheck arrives, before you've had a chance to look at your account balance and start negotiating with yourself, the behavior becomes structural rather than optional. Americans who automate their retirement contributions save at roughly twice the rate of those who contribute manually. That gap isn't about character. It's about friction. Remove the friction, and the behavior follows. The third key is getting genuinely comfortable with delayed gratification. And this one is worth being honest about, because it's harder than it sounds in a financial video. The culture around you is optimized to make spending feel good right now and make saving feel abstract and distant. Every subscription, every upgrade, every financing offer is engineered to compress the reward into the present and push the cost into the future. Compounding works in exactly the opposite direction. The cost is now. The reward is later. Getting comfortable with that inversion, not just intellectually accepting it, but actually feeling okay sitting with it, is one of the genuine behavioral challenges of phase 1 and 2. The people who get through it aren't unusually disciplined. They've just built an accurate mental picture of what the delay is actually worth. The fourth key is skill development as a financial strategy. Your income is the engine that funds everything else. A person earning $65,000 a year has a fundamentally different compounding trajectory than someone earning $110,000. Not because of what they spend, but because of what they can consistently invest. Getting so good at something that the market pays a premium for it is not a soft career goal. It's a compounding accelerant. Every meaningful income increase you generate in your 30s has roughly 30 years to compound. And that is an extraordinary multiplier on professional effort. The fifth key is thinking in decades rather than months. This is the hardest cognitive shift, and also the most important one. Your brain is wired to weigh near-term outcomes more heavily than distant ones. That's not a flaw. It's how human cognition works. But it means the default setting is almost perfectly wrong for long-term investing. The people who build real financial security aren't better at picking investments. They're better at zooming out. They measure progress in 5-year intervals, not quarterly statements. They don't confuse a bad year with a broken strategy. They stay in the game long enough for the math to do what the math does. These 5 keys aren't equally important at every phase, but applied consistently across all 4 phases, they are the mechanism, not the inspiration, the actual mechanism. And once you see how they connect across the full arc of compounding, the conclusion starts to look a lot less like a finish line and a lot more like a foundation. Here is what this all comes down to. Compounding is not a savings strategy. It is not an investment tip. It is a process with distinct phases, and each phase has its own logic, its own demands, and its own way of rewarding the people who understand what they are inside of. The reason so many people end up with $600 a month in retirement after 40 years of work is not laziness. It is not bad luck. It is that they were playing a long game without knowing the rules of each level. Like they applied phase 1 thinking to phase 3 problems. They quit during the grind because nobody told them that invisibility is exactly what phase 1 is supposed to feel like. They mistook silence for failure, and they walked away from a machine that was just getting started. Once you understand that, the whole picture shifts. A few things are worth carrying forward from this. Time is your most leveraged asset in the early phases. More powerful than your income, and more powerful than your investment choices. Automation is not a convenience. It is a structural override of the behavioral instincts that work against you. Reputation and skill compound on the same curve as money, just in a different account. And legacy is not what you leave behind when you're done. It is what you build while you are still here, deliberately and with the people around you in mind. The reflection worth sitting with is this. Which phase are you actually in right now? Not which phase you feel like you should be in or wish you were in. Which one fits your current reality? Because the move that matters most is always the one appropriate to where you actually are, not where you hope to be in 5 years. And here is the unresolved question that tends to follow people out of this conversation. Assuming you understand the 4 phases, what is the biggest reason people still stall between them? It is not the math. It is not access to information. It is almost always behavior under pressure. How do you actually build the psychological infrastructure to stay consistent when the market drops 30%, when an unexpected expense wipes out 3 months of contributions, when the progress feels invisible for the second year in a row? That question deserves its own conversation, and it is worth having. If this framing changed how you think about where you are in the process, share it with someone who is still early in phase 1. They need the map more than the motivation.